Public Library.
Okay, go ahead.
This is an interview at the Public Library Center in Moriches, New York, 9th of March, 2004, 2:45 p.m. Interviewers are Wayne Clark and Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
My name is James Wesley Langhorn. My nickname is Butch, which is what I use mostly. My date of birth is April 8th, 1945, and I was born in Southampton, Long Island, New York.
Okay. Prior to entering military service, what was your educational background?
High school graduate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
Enlisted.
Okay.
Right out of high school. Well, soon after high school.
And that was in March of...
March of 1964, right.
You enlisted in the Army.
Army,
Why
yes.
did you select the Army?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know why I selected the Army. I happened to move into Queens where my dad was living, thinking I'd get off of Long Island, and I stayed with him for about 6 months and really wasn't happy about that. And I happened to be walking down Jamaica Avenue, and I happened to walk past the Army recruiting office and said, let me just check, see what's going on with the Army. 4 days later, I was at Whitehall Street taking the physical, the written test, and a week later, I was in Fort Dix, New Jersey. So, and that the rest is history. So that's no thought process took place. Not much anyway.
Did you ever think that you'd end up in Vietnam?
No, at the time I never thought about Vietnam.
And we've interviewed a couple that thought naively that.
Right. No, it didn't dawn on me that I was going to be going to Vietnam.
Where did you go for your basic training?
Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Well, okay, that's right. You said that. How long were you there?
I stayed there for, I guess, 8 weeks of basic training, and then I was supposed to go through missile training. I was waiting for a school for that, and I guess I was there another 6 to 8 weeks, and then I got shipped up to Loring Air Force Base, Maine, where I was going to be going through a missile course up there to become a missileman. And I was up there about 3 weeks waiting for the course to start, and something happened where I happened to see the Eradcom Choir, which was the Army choir. They were performing there, and I happened to go and listen, and they were looking for people who were interested in singing. I happened to have a voice, and I was sick of waiting for something to happen. And I said, hey, this sounds interesting. And I had an interview. I had a taped rehearsal, and I became a member of the Eradcom Choir, which was the Army choir, which we traveled for around all over, singing for the Army, different bases and stuff like that. So I did that for about, I guess, about a year, not even going to the missile school. I worked in personnel. I studied to be a clerk typist and worked in personnel. That's what my MOS was. They OJT'd me more or less in that career field, while at the same time I was, you might say, on the special services, in the special services arena as the Eradcom Choir. I stuck with that for about a year, and then I decided that I didn't want to do that, and I had an opportunity to come back to Fort Totten, which was on the island. It's a small station on the island. I said, hey, maybe I want to get close to home again, because my mother at that time had gotten sick. So I decided to come back to Long Island, which is what Fort Totten was on. And I spent, I guess, about a year at Fort Totten, and that's where I got my hello orders to to Vietnam. So that was the chain that I went through prior to getting assigned to Vietnam. I spent 13 months there.
Whereabouts?
I started off we landed in Tent City 8, Saigon, and that was 1965, I think. Then I went to Vung Toa, which is where I was assigned for about 6 months, 5.5, 6 months, and then they switched me back to Saigon for the remainder of the 6, 7 months that I was there for a total of 13 months. And the remainder of the time that I was there, I was in Saigon. I stayed in Saigon, worked out of Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base in Saigon.
Were you with MACV?
I was with MACV, yeah. And basically, like I said, I did personnel work for the Army at that time. We were located right by the staging area for the bodies to come in. And that was one of the most traumatic things that I saw during Vietnam. I wasn't in combat. Back then it was early. Vung Toa was like the R&R center for both sides. You could be on the beach and not knowing who, the Vietnamese, they could have been Viet Cong, but it was the R&R center at that time for in country. And then when I got to Saigon, they were bombing around Saigon, but Tan Son Nhut got hit twice 2 days before I was to leave Saigon. That was the first time Tan Son Nhut had gotten hit. The outer perimeters got hit, which sort of shook me up a little bit, because I said, hey, wait a minute, I spent 13 months here, and I'm ready to go, and now, we get hit. But it was an experience. I'm perfectly normal, as normal as I was, before I went there. So I thank God for that. But I was a young, scared young man when I was there, part of the time. But it, just like anything else, you become, I guess, your surroundings and know what you can deal with and what you can't deal with. So that's you have to make the best of it, and that's basically what I did.
Were you able to get into downtown Saigon at all?
We spent a lot. Again, I have to say, when I was there, I explain it to being just like being in New York City. Okay, as a matter of fact, I didn't like Vung Toa that much, but Saigon, I had always said I would like to go back once everything ended, just to to find out what it was like, because I think it was a beautiful city. The French architect, Tudor Street was just like New York City. The bars were beautiful bars, and at that age, that's where we hung out when we weren't working. We were downtown messing with the young ladies in the bars, and I was amazed at the architect, the French architect that they had in Saigon. All of the bars, they were as nice, if not nicer, than the ones in Manhattan, you might say. So that sort of impressed me. Another thing that I found very funny, which stays in my head, is that I happened to date a Vietnamese woman early when I got to Saigon, and we didn't have curfew most of the time in Saigon, because Saigon, as I said, was pretty much an area where you could come and go as you pretty much please, as long as you kept the curfew times. And she invited me, after a couple of weeks, she had invited me to her home to have a meal. And I got there, and her mother started jibber-jabbering. Now, I couldn't speak a lick of Vietnamese, but she was making hand gestures like this and like this. So I said to her daughter, I said, Tan, I said, what's going on? And I began to become alarmed, because I'm thinking now something might happen. So I said, Tan, what's going on? What's your mother? And she could speak very good English. She said, my mother wants you to go take a bath and come back and we'll eat. And I said, that sounds good to me. So I went, took a Vietnamese bath. You sit in the tub and you wash up. Came back out, put my clothes on, came back out, and she went at it again. You know, and I'm saying, God, what is this woman talking about? I said, Tom, what's going on? And she was laughing. She said, she wants to know how come, you know, same mini GIs. She thought I was white, but I was dirty. So that stays, you know, that stays, and that tells you how early it was that I was there. So that pretty much sticks in the back of my mind. But that's pretty much, you know, what I remember. I even though I wasn't actually in combat, I sort of put all of that to the back of my mind, because as I said, one of our major things that we did in between pecking on the typewriters was counting the caskets as they came through on the flatbeds, and that's something that I remember like yesterday, and you know, it bothered me then, and it bothers me today, and it always has bothered me about the war and the military, but it's something inevitable that happens. That's why I don't particularly care for what's going on with Mr. Bush today, because we didn't need to be there as far as I'm concerned, and the way we got there wasn't. You know, I felt that way about Vietnam, because when I did come home, like many soldiers, the first thing I got was, you know, who do you think you are? What do you think you are? Spit. You know, I didn't get spit in the face, but I got spit on my uniform, wearing a uniform.
So as early as when you came back in 66?
66, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, and I couldn't understand why we were there. As a matter of fact, the Vietnamese used to say, "Go home, GI. Go home, GI. We don't need you over here." So I often wondered. I spent 13 months there, but I often wondered why we were there, why our soldiers had to get killed the way they did, and what was it for. Today, I still wonder. You know, I'm not totally sure as to why we were there, other than the fact that we were told to go, and we did what we were told to do.
So at the time you were there, you found that you had fairly good relationships with the people.
Oh yeah.
How about race relationships within the Army itself?
I didn't find much of a problem with the differences in race. I don't know whether I was fortunate, because certainly it was around, but I was from an area where, you know, people were people first, okay, being on Long Island, being in Riverhead, which was a multicultural back then, and I'm not saying I handle it any better than anybody else, but I certainly, because I didn't see it, you know, I knew when it was out, and I just left it alone. I've always felt that my dollar was as good as your dollar. You know, I put my pants on the same way you put your pants on. If you don't want me, just let me know, and I'll make the decision as to whether I want to move somewhere else, go somewhere else, or stay and argue about it. Most cases, I was able to stay. Some cases I moved out for fear of, you know, having a problem. But I didn't have that much of a problem. So I would say, to answer your question, I had a great military career.
Even though you still have some ambivalent feelings about if you should have been there or not, do you ever read anything, watch any of the movies?
No. I stay away from that. I don't go to the movies to see any war movies. Didn't like them before I went in the service, and don't like them now.
You don't read anything, any of those
No,
books?
I don't. I refuse to do that.
Okay. All right, so when you got back home in 66, you did see some anti-war things. How did you feel about the anti-war movement? And later on, too, when it was...
Again, I guess, I had my own personal feelings, but I guess I kept them to myself because, I stayed away from that group, and I moved on with the rest of my life. As I said, I had gotten out of the military. When I left the Army, I got out and came back home and opened up a business, clothing store, went into business for myself. For about 2 years, and damn near lost my shirt doing that. That was in the 70s when, money wasn't that great, and being the only black owner of a business in Riverhead wasn't the greatest thing either, but it was a reason why I did it, partly, because I wanted to make a statement. That's the type of guy I've always been. And it was I don't regret doing it. I certainly learned a lot, but I also learned that I didn't want to be in the retail business after 2 years. So there was a reserve base over in West Hampton, the Air National Guard. Actually, it was an old Air Force base. It had closed down in 70. And the reserves came out in 71. And one of the gentlemen that had an account in my store, he was the Air Force advisor out there. So he says, well, Butch, what are you going to do? Because I told him I was selling the store. He says, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'll find a job. He said, why don't you come out to the base? He said, you ever been in the military? I said, yeah, I spent Army time. He says, well, there's an Air National Guard base. So I said, what the devil is the Air National Guard? I know the Army National Guard, but I had never heard of the... He said, it's the same thing as the as the Army National Guard, but it's a component of the Air Force rather than the Army. So I said, okay. I said, well, I don't want to go back in the military. So he says, well, this is reserve type of duty, 1 week in the month. He said, they have state positions, full-time positions out there where you can work. So I said, it sounds like a good idea. So I went out there and ended up, they hired me in personnel out there as a GS-5. And I said, hey, this is good enough until I find something better. And the rest is history. I went back on active duty with them in 1973. I went to recruiting school, which was an active duty position, active duty billet, and I stayed in recruiting pretty much 19 years in the recruiting field before I moved back into the personnel arena and took over the personnel advisor, for the base. And that ended up I stayed there until 99. When I retired off of active duty.
So you retired with a total of about 34 years?
I retired with 28 active years, 34 total years.
Okay.
Total reserve years, but 28 active.
Okay. Do you, after you left, did you join any veterans organizations?
I belong to the VFW in my lifetime. I'm the VFW.
Active?
Yes, very active with them. That's one reason how I ended up getting back into the Veterans Affairs side of the house. I did it, or I oversaw it when I was on active duty as the director of personnel. A lot of the work dealt with veterans, dependents, and so when I retired, Mike Forbes called me up because I knew him for years. He was a local guy, and he said, "Butch, I need somebody to handle my veterans affairs." And I said, "Mike."
Now, for the camera, who is Mike Forbes?
He was the congressman at the time. In 1998, he's the gentleman I told you that I worked for previously, and he called me up next. Would I handle his veterans affairs for him? So I did, and basically it was pretty much because I knew the ins and outs of ARPC, the National Personnel Records Center, the archives. It made my job as an aide dealing with veterans affairs fairly simple when it came to that stuff. So I because I knew that background, it made the appearance that, this guy really knows his stuff, because I was fairly successful with Mike Forbes and getting some veterans their claims cleared up. Some old claims that had been lingering for quite a while, I was able to, get finalized. So I got a good reputation, and I guess when Tim Bishop became the congressman, he called me up and said, "Hey, Butch, how about coming back to work for me?" And again, I liked my job, so I said, "Hey, I'll do that." I'm also the Democratic chair for Riverhead, so it keeps me in loop with what's going on, for what I like to dabble with politics. So it's, it all fits.
Okay. Have you ever stayed in contact with anyone that was in service?
No, not really. I've got one fella that I've tried to look up in basic training, and you asked a question about race relations. He was a gentleman from Wolf Creek, Tennessee, white fella, and that was probably, I won't say definitely, but it was probably one of the only incidents that I can remember having a racial incident. This was in basic training. I had came in about 10 o'clock, I guess. I don't know where I was, but I came in late. It was bed call. Everybody, lights was out. Everybody was in their bunk. Me and another guy came in, and we were making a little bit of noise, and he said, "Why don't you shut the, I don't know, with the camera, up, you nigger," and with that, I just went over and knocked him down a flight of steps. To make a long story short, at the end of the 8 weeks of basic training, he came home with me, shared my home for 10 days. He moved on to his MOS training, and I went back to Fort Dix, and I lost track of him, and I've always wanted to get in contact with Jerry. His name was Jerry Helms. And I've tried computers, looking on computer sites to see if I've almost gone, one of these days, if I get some time and a little extra money, I think I'm going to go to Wolf Creek, Tennessee, and because there can't be that many people in Wolf Creek, Tennessee that, back, so I should be able to find out where he is or if he's still alive. But the question that you asked, he's the only one that I've really wanted to see. And haven't been able to really look him up. But hopefully before I stop breathing, we'll have found something about him, where he was or where he is or something.
How do you think your time in service has affected your life?
I think it made me, I know it made me a man, because I left, when I left I was only 19 years old, just a young 19, never been away from home, and it's pretty much given me the philosophy that I believe in. I believe in fairness. I was treated fairly. I made it to the top, and I didn't have to kiss anybody's butt to make it to the top. I struggled to get to the top, but I did get there. So, I know how to look behind me to see, from whence I came. So, that I appreciate, and I got that from Uncle Sam. So I owe a lot to the military. I respect it to the most. So much that my son told me, "Dad, I don't want to go in the military." And I said, "Son, if you don't want to, don't go, because I don't want you to ruin my reputation." You don't have to go. There's other ways to make it into the world. My daughter, she often talked about going in, and I used to cringe, but I would never say no. I told her, "Kelly," I said, you need to do what you need to do, and but you need to go to school first." unfortunately, she got a teaching degree, and soon after that, got married, and then went the military thought, so I was glad of that. But I never told her no if she wanted to make that commitment. I would have said yes, but I'm glad she went the way she went. But I love the military. I owe everything that I have to the military and my mother.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your interview.
Okay. Thank you.